I hope you folks take something good out of what I've got to say. So as Michaela said, I have an academic background in economics and environmental sciences. That's what I did for my bachelor's. By the end, however, I was left pretty dissatisfied with the lack of connection between the two disciplines in the formal syllabuses. I tried to change the syllabuses, but there was a lot of resistance from the department. Anyways, it was pretty clear to me that our economy and economic way derived thinking were the primary drivers of our plethora of wicked problems that we face, not just climate change. There are so many, unfortunately. So once I graduated, I started working for a charity called Climate Science. And what we do there, well, I don't work for them anymore. What we did there was creating accessible and reliable information specifically about climate solutions. And I figured back then that the issue really was a lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding of the different climate solutions, so that by spreading this information in creative and engaging ways, more and more people would support them and support policies that incentivize them, or at least change their lifestyles. What took me probably too long to realize was that I was working on, and while it was good work, and I really enjoyed it and super important, and I'm happy it's all there now. It took me a long time to understand that I was working on spreading information to fix the symptoms of a much wider and perverse issue. We weren't really addressing the cause. Which I then realized was the cause of many more of our existential crises. So I delved into this issue, and the most convincing diagnosis of these symptoms that I could find was growth. I read a lot, and really, this was the most convincing argument that I could find, that our addiction to growth for the sake of growth was destabilizing everything that makes life worth living. So what did I do? Well, I decided to enroll in this master's program on degrowth at the Autonomous University of Barcelona because, and this is a fun quote, one cannot fight something that one does not know. But don't go jumping into conclusions. You don't need higher level education to understand that the problem is growth. You can get the basics really online, like webinars such as this one, and use that knowledge to take action. And so, as this is the topic of the webinar, what kind of actions can you, particularly young people, take? I get asked this a lot, like a lot. And my answer has changed throughout the years, to be honest. And right now, at least, what I think is the single biggest and most important thing that you can do is, ironically, to unlearn. So what do I mean by this, right? By unlearning. So for our entire lives, almost regardless of where you live in the world, we've been bombarded with the ideology that growth is good, that growth is natural, that humans are not part of nature and therefore we can exploit it, that some humans are worth more than other humans, etc., etc. This happens in our schools, in our movies, in our books. It comes from our parents, our friends, our teachers, our social media, etc. And so what I mean by unlearning, when I say that, I mean to decolonize our imaginary, right? So to perceive the world through a more pluriversal approach that takes into account many different ways of thinking about our economy, that prioritize human well-being within planetary boundaries. And don't get me wrong, this is extremely difficult. This is so hard to do because, like I said, it's essentially been propaganda without us really realizing it's been propaganda for our entire lives. And so once you get to unlearn this and see that there are genuine alternatives out there, whether you call it post-growth, donut economics, degrowth, A-growth, etc., there do exist genuine, well-researched, well-thought-out alternatives, and not just in our economic way of thinking, but also the way that we perceive nature, the way that we see the complex web of life around us, the way that we value time or relationality or commons, etc. Right? So there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen, right? And so what do you do once this has taken me years, by the way, so it's not easy, and it takes a lot of time and it takes effort, right? Because everything that you're reading to unlearn, there's always some Netflix show or some politician speaking that tries to keep ingraining it, right? So it's an active process. And so what you can then do, and I still believe in this, like I did at Climate Science, is to raise awareness about this, about unlearning, about alternatives, about different ways of valuing, of assigning value to what we think is valuable in life, right? Like spending time with family, like dancing, like not having to work an awful or at least a degrading job in order to pay your student loans to achieve a higher education, right? Or to pay off your mortgage because you need to live somewhere, or to pay off rent, which is crazy, in my opinion. So by talking about this, right, with your parents, posting it on social media, challenging your friends to thought-provoking questions, etc., more and more people can become aware of this. And like with it's not easy, right? I send emails to like my whole family, my grandparents, uncles, and stuff. No one replies. But I know that some of them are reading it, right? And I know that some of them are at least grasping this information and know that there is an alternative, right? And slowly but surely, the more and more people are aware, the more they will support policies that promote human well-being within planetary boundaries, right? The more likely they are to change their habits and lifestyles in accordance to a post-growth society. The more likely they are to assign value, what they believe is good and healthy for them, to things that don't fall under this growth paradigm, right? And so this doesn't just include those right around you, but it also includes creating bonds and alliances with people from different countries, for example. And this can be hard, but hey, if you follow an Instagram page that posts on climate and you scroll through the comments and you click on someone's name, shoot them a message. Hey, what do you think about this, etc., right? Maybe they're from Latvia, maybe they're from Eswatini or Argentina, etc. And so by creating these alliances, by having more international solidarity between the global north and the global south, we will be able to have more coordinated, more organized, a more pluriversal strategy in order to transition our addiction to growth, to something that is a little more humane and in line with our planetary boundaries, right? And the key thing is that this can help everybody, and it's important to make those links, right? Like everyone from land defenders and activists to trade unions and teachers and academics and nurses, etc., right? Everybody can benefit, because at the end of the day, the people who benefit from growth are the very, very, very few elite that effectively have politicians in their pockets and buy up Twitter and different corporate medias, etc., right? And then, for the sake of time, apologies, to top it all off, the last piece of advice I have is conscious career choices, right? So as we're young, we're starting to get into our careers, starting to think about what we can do. If you're in this webinar, I'm assuming you're interested in having an impact and making some change. And so as Project Drawdown so eloquently put it a couple of years ago, every job is a climate job, right? Well, this can also apply to mean that every job is a post-growth job, right? Every single sector in our economy, aside from maybe the fossil fuel industry, can play a part in transitioning our economies towards a post-growth society. Whether you want to be a graphic designer, an architect, an accountant, a lawyer, a fire person, etc., there's always something you can do to expand your communities, to raise awareness, and to create solidarity between others. Because in a world that is so divided at the moment, a little solidarity can't hurt.
Hi everyone, and thank you for the short introduction, Michaela. So my name is Hannah, and I am a GCE alumna, and now work within climate education in schools in Cambridge and around the UK, teaching young pupils about the climate emergency, in particular how it relates to religion and theism and ethics, and why, not just because of the science, but why we have an ethical duty to treat others in the planet as we wish to be treated. I recently graduated from Cambridge, and my background is in geography. And so, yeah, I'll go into the next slide. So I was asked to speak a bit about my experience within climate advocacy within a few minutes, which is quite challenging to do, but I've managed to narrow it into 3 different areas across the time that I've been an environmentalist, at least. I would say they can be characterised into 3 areas. So UK inequality, how the pandemic impacted me personally, and my experience within youth climate advocacy. So I'll talk about all 3 briefly and hopefully give you some advice about how to get involved in the youth climate advocacy scene for those of you who are here. So like I said, my background is in geography, and before I got into climate advocacy, because during high school I didn't receive any sort of climate education, as I will presume many of you didn't either, just because it is not something that is on our curriculums at the moment. One of my interests was with the economic situation in the UK and how it relates to social mobility outcomes for UK youth. And I come from the north of England, and it's a particular challenge from youth from this area to enter higher education institutions. So prior to my climate work, I did a lot of work trying to get young people from the north of England into universities, particularly Oxford and Cambridge, but all universities generally speaking. And particularly now in the UK, the situation is quite dire with regards to the cost of living, which can be sort of illustrated through the rise of food banks and the wealth inequality that we're seeing in a minute. It's just some of the screen grabs on the screen at the moment are from some of the papers that I was reading during my bachelor's, and I believe the issues that we're seeing at the moment with these barriers of social mobility are much like the climate crisis, another symptom of our failing economic system. And so this is really where my entry into climate work began, because I saw that barriers of social mobility are also stopping us making large strides with climate action. We need all youth involved, and that requires all youth to have the same opportunities to advance themselves in terms of the education that they want to receive. And this is like a holistic approach that we need to take when we approach climate. So then we come on to the pandemic. So I will be talking about the coronavirus pandemic over the next few minutes, so please feel free to drop off, then hop back on if this is something that you would rather not listen to. But during the pandemic, I was reading a lot of work by Naomi Klein, who's quite a preeminent political commentator, who was and quite influential within my degree. And she quoted Arundhati Roy, who is quite a famous poet, in describing the pandemic as a portal, as an opportunity for us to pursue things anew and pursue things in a greener, more sustainable way. And much like a portal, as you can read from the quote on the screen, there are many outcomes that we can take when we step through it. There are greener, more sustainable alternatives. There's the status quo, and there's a less green, even more capitalist, individualistic option. And the pandemic provided opportunity, and still does provide an opportunity for us to see what doesn't work with our current economic system that I don't doubt you've discussed in the previous 2 webinars, to see what doesn't work, to see what continues to subjugate the least privileged of us, and to see what does work and what will benefit all, and to pursue that instead. And one of my interests now within environmentalism and geography is how the humanities, and particularly Roy speaks quite artistically and quite poetically here, and see how the arts and humanities intersect with environmentalism. And that's what I want you to get away from this, is that even if your interests might not seem connected to climate, but undoubtedly they will be. And the climate crisis and climate advocacy can be quite a poetic and artistic way of living. It's certainly one of the ways that I go about my activism now. And likewise, when we talk about opportunities like the pandemic, in regards to the economic situation, providing a portal, they provide us a way to unlearn, much like JP was saying, unlearn what doesn't work and relearn in a continual process what might work, and to rethink not only our relationship with nature, our relationship with the economy, but our relationship with ourselves. And this is what Arundhati Roy and Naomi Klein get into. It's what I'm greatly inspired by. So the pandemic for me was a time of great reflection, as I don't doubt it was for many of you. And it's really solidified my place within my climate work. So that brings me to the work that I've done since. So I've been a part of Climate Talk, Generation Climate Europe, and most recently the Future Leaders Network, which is a UK-based charity hoping to generate the next generation of future leaders in the UK. They have an opportunity to send the UK youth delegation to the Y7, which is the Youth G7, the Y20, so the Youth G20, and to each UNFCCC COP. And I was selected to go to COP27 a few weeks ago with them, which was an excellent opportunity. So this is like where my activism is at the moment. But aside from all this, within the academic sphere, so I hope to do a master's next year and pursue geography and environmentalism, but like I kind of alluded to before, from a more humanities perspective. I'm greatly inspired by the work of Rachel Carson. So Rachel Carson wrote the book Silent Spring in the 1960s, and here is I'll let you read it, but here's a quote from a paper written by Lisa Maxwell about how Silent Spring allows us to rethink what we mean by environmentalism. Like I said at the start of my talk, the moment that got me into environmentalism was seeing how my work within social mobility and economic inequality related to the climate. But there's also a more artistic, more humanities focused idea of environmentalism. Environmentalism framed in terms of austerity politics, but one that's framed through the arts. And one quote that I quite like to live by. So for context, I did my bachelor's thesis on Advocacy, which is an encyclical by Pope Francis, and I compared it to the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees C of global warming. And this encyclical talks quite eloquently about climate change. And in this paper in particular by Maxwell, she talks about how when we destroy, when we harm nature, not only do we harm nature itself, but we lose part of what it is to be human, because we understand the world around us through analogies, through metaphors, through artistic language that often calls on nature. So for instance, in Buddhism, when talking about grief and loss, they use the analogy of a wave. They say, picture a wave in the ocean. You can see the way that the light refracts through it. You can see it's there, it's a wave, and then it disappears. But the water isn't gone. The water was just a different way for the wave to be for a little while. And they relate that to personal ideas of loss, of a loved one in particular. And the idea that they use nature, they use the water itself to understand and come to terms with particular events in their life, relates to my approach to environmentalism, because if we lose nature, we lose the ability to understand these moments in our lives, because we've harmed that by which we draw inspiration from. And that is where my interests lie at the moment. So I think what I want you to get out of this is to find what is it you're interested in that might not at all be related to climate initially, or you might not think it is related to climate initially, and keep learning, keep reading about it, and see how you can implement it into the climate work that you're doing, because that's what is going to motivate you to keep going. Because I'm aware, seeing IPCC assessment reports come out every annual COP as well happen, it can be quite an emotional path to take, and finding a place in it that is inspired by your interests and your passions can keep you motivated. And one thing I like to finish by, because I always love sharing these photos, it's just like my friends I've met along the way. Most of these are taken at COP, but these are the people who have made my journey. And I think when we talk about, particularly in the professional sphere, talking about like networks and connections, I sometimes don't like this language because it feels really corporate, but I think within the climate space, building these friendships is what makes it worth it. And when we see, what's happening, it's what's happening in a minute with current economic systems and inequality, knowing that there are other people in this fight with us really makes it worthwhile, and makes it seem like it's less of a shouting into the void battle, and one that instead we're all together in. So that's just me. Some references that I just put on the end in case you want to read anything. But yeah, looking forward to hearing questions and chatting a bit more.